everyone that while this is very much the epicenter of the colonial experience in North America, right there are the oldest remaining walls of the Presidio, this is also a lonely land. And for many, many years, thousands of years, before the Spaniards arrived, this was a lonely land. Wherever you go in the Bay Area tonight, you'll be in Indian country. Wherever you go in California, you'll be on Indian land. In fact, anywhere you go in this hemisphere, between the Arctic Ocean and Patagonia, be in Indian country. Just hope if there's one thing to take away from tonight, it's that recognition, that realization that we're in Indian country.
Oh.
The second thing that I would like to say is that the material that I am going to present tonight is graphic, is violent, and it presents evil. If at any point you feel that you need to take a break, to get some air, go outside, I will not hold that against you. I will understand. This is a difficult presentation for me to deliver because it is so freighted with emotion and human tragedy. Nationalist interpretations of United States history will now, I think, also come into question as we begin to compare the colonization of California in its violence and brutality to the colonization of other places around the world. Australia comes to mind. A careful study of the genocide that took place here in California will also assist us in re-examining what we think we know about the colonization of the hemisphere as a whole. Where scholars documented genocide, it then becomes necessary to carefully evaluate what role local and national governments played, as well as whether or not these killings are part of a regional or national pattern. Larger questions then follow. What tended to catalyze genocide against indigenous peoples? Who ordered and carried out the killing? Why do we not know more about these events?
Why is it so important to educate the people today about something that happened so long ago and maybe draw to a conclusion to how it impacts communities today with the destruction and usurping of our sacred sites, economic deprivation, and the continuing of our cultural genocide?
So I would say three things to that, Greg. It's an excellent question because it's the heart of why I'm doing this work. The first point I would say is common decency. Common decency demands that we recognize what happened, that we remember the victims. The second issue for me is justice. Even long after these perpetrators are dead and gone, I think that it's very important to reveal the crimes that they and their advocates have too often successfully denied, concealed, and erased. And finally, there's the issue of veracity. I think we need to know the truth about what happened in our history. I don't say that just as an historian, I say that as a human being. Truth-telling is fundamentally important to make whole our fragmented society, not only for Native people, but for non-Native people too.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I think for our Native communities, we live with this historical trauma. Sometimes we don't even know we don't have a memory of the specifics, but the disruption of our lives that becomes a pattern that keeps being replicated because disruption has become what we know, and we don't know anything else except fear and disruption. Once you can shine light on this monster that is history, we have a chance then to name the monster that continues to destroy us via this historical trauma. That's for the Indian people. For the non-Indian people and the relation between Indians and non-Indians, there's the chance to look at the way in which we continue to replicate these patterns here and worldwide. They're not going away. They happen every day. They're replicated. They happen on the streets when you see the murder of young black men, or in Santa Rosa, the murder of a young Mexican 14 years old. and the sheriff promoting the deputy who shot him. These patterns keep happening because we don't talk, we don't know. And it's the pattern and the paradigm that has to be broken. And it can only be broken when truth is told. Because it is those things that are unconscious that keep us repeating the pattern. Does that make sense?
Psychological and human health ramifications. The question of genocide is particularly urgent for California's 150,000 plus Indian people. Should the 110 federally recognized tribes in California press for government apologies, reparations, or control of the lands where these genocidal events took place? Will tribes such as the 70 plus unrecognized California Indian communities marshal evidence of the genocides that they survived in cases involving tribal sovereignty or recognition by the federal government? How should California Indian communities commemorate mass murder while also emphasizing successful resistance, accommodation, survival, and today's current process of cultural renewal? The psychological issues are also fraught. What happens when a tribal member learns that he or she is descended both from genocide perpetrators and from genocide survivors? How might California Indian people reconcile increased knowledge of the genocide that their ancestors survived, often at the hands of agents of the United States government, with California Indian communities' intense patriotism? Finally, what role will acknowledgement of genocide have in the acknowledgement of intergenerational and historical trauma, and that trauma's direct connection to current human health issues? Thinking of things like physical illnesses, substance abuse, domestic violence, and the incredibly high rates of suicide that today plague California Indian youth. The question of genocide in California under U.S. rule also exposes explosive questions for all of us, whether you are native or not. Should government officials tender public apologies, as George Herbert Walker Bush and Ronald Reagan did, for the forcible removal and relocation of some 120,000 Japanese Americans during the Second World War, many of whom, by the way, were taken from this place, from San Francisco?
And I'm here today representing the Cosinone, Rumsen, Carmel tribe of the Ohlone people. Welcome to the territory. I'm also here in my park ranger outfit. I also am a member and work for the National Park Service of the GGNRA, which is where the park that you are all standing in as well. I just wanted to say a few things. Thank you so much for writing this amazing book, to bringing light to our history that I tell on a daily basis here in the GGNRA. It is so great to know that another voice like you is actually bringing light to the actual history of our people. And the reason behind your whole book here too is to let you know and the public know the reason to why there is no Ohlone here. I know that Mr. Greg Castro is here, myself, I know Noreen was here as well earlier. Those are 3 representatives of Ohlone people, and so is Miss Canyon Sayers-Roods. And so I just want to say that our history here is to the reason to why our people got relocated. My actual last ancestry left in 1854 from this area because of all of the bad things that were happening to our people. I am and my sister are the first of 2,000 members to come back to our traditional homeland. And so to me, to be behind this mic and to share some light with you, I'm so grateful that you are telling the real history of not only Ohlone people, but all Native American people, because just a little inch of just the missions, our missions. I'm number 152 in the Carmel Mission records. I was baptized, married, and buried by Father Sarah. And so that says a lot of stuff about the mission system, how we're Catholics today because of the missions, how my 4th grade cousins have to make missions instead of maybe village sites because we came from 7 different missions and 7 different villages. all through the Bay Area. You know, our big territory, look at today, you don't see that many Ohlone people here. And so just to see the few that are in the room will show you how almost our whole tribe got erased. But it's people like you who bring light to this history, and people like me and like Greg and like Canyon and like Noreen, how we all come out to tell people that Ohlone people are still here. And I always like to come up with this that I tell people in my talks, you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know, but it's who knows you. And I want everyone here to know that Ohlone people still do exist. And I want to thank you all once again for always bringing light to all of this history. And just a comment, I want to know how can we, or I should say question, I'm sorry, how can I talk to the public about what happened to our people and how we're still here today to make that disconnect, like we didn't all die or we all left, because we are still here. I want to know how I can make the connect to then and now and what we're doing, because we're having our big time like Friday, and not a lot of people know that we still have a living, breathing culture. And I want people to have the disconnect of then and now and make it to that we are still a living, breathing culture. So maybe you can answer how I can bring the disconnect to the National Park Service.
So my friend Willie Bauer, who is Wailaki from Round Valley Reservation and is professor of history at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, likes to talk about how there's this dark cloud, this specter of grief and sorrow and profound pain, the genocide that hangs over California Indian history. But there's this silver light around that cloud, and that's this spectacular miracle of survival. Despite incredible, impossible odds, how did people survive? How did they do it? So at the same time that I think the story of the genocide needs to be told, the story of the survival is equally important because it's almost just as unknown. My students at UCLA are always surprised when I tell them there are 150,000 California Indians. They're always surprised to find out that Los Angeles is the second biggest Indian city in this country after New York. And they're the most surprised to find out that there are more indigenous people living in California than in any other state in the Union. But we have to share those stories, particularly as educators. So on the one hand, the story of genocide, but on the other hand, the story of survivance and cultural renewal. And the California Indian people in some ways are flourishing today, certainly relative to the times that I describe in this book.
In California.
The casino is an issue that Greg is probably much better equipped to address.
Where does it fit in? What happened is, again, there were two sets, and this is a little bit of history. Ben talked about the first reservations that weren't ratified, that we were put to, starved, and we were promised things, and then nothing came through. In the early part of the 20th century, they started setting aside pieces of land for the so-called homeless Indians of California. They didn't even mostly call us by tribe, it was just where to put us, right? Okay, so they collected us together. As Gloria alluded to, in 1922, they gave Graton 15.5 acres, and the legislation said, for all the homeless Indians of Tomales Bay, Bodega Bay, and Sebastopol and vicinities thereof, that's where you go. And most of these were places that were hardly inhabitable. Then, of course, there was the California Indian Rancheria Termination Act in 1958, which again attempted to terminate and succeeded in terminating illegally many Indian tribes' sovereignty, including our own, which we've gotten back. So all of a sudden, we have nothing, and people started saying the notion of first bingo came up, and we argued in the courts on these remote pieces of land and so forth to have casinos where we could generate an income. Because it was sovereign land, we weren't subject to state and local laws, therefore. federal laws, yes, we were. So it's a long process. In fact, someone, our colleague at UCLA, Carol Goldberg, argued Public Law 280, which we were able then to have Class 3 game. So we began to do that in our various places. And as a consequence, some tribes, not all, have been able to get casinos and have been quite successful. Now the big question is, people say to us, well, that's not very Indian. Well, I don't know how Safeway is Mormon. And I don't know how, lots of other things are this or that. So what it becomes is for us to have a means of economic independence. And it should be understood as that. And again, that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Suddenly we become economically independent, some of us. And we become powerful, some of us. And then we're devils again. Oh, that's terrible. It's gaming, it's lowlife, it's not Indian. I remember, legislators saying, some local legislators right here saying, why do they have to go that way? Why can't they just get scholarships? Well, we've been sitting around waiting for the scholarships for a long time. I ain't seen many, right? And why don't they do this or why don't they do that? It's interesting. So, you take an opportunity and then the test becomes to do the right thing with the opportunity. And that is in the case of my tribe, to use what revenues we will have to advocate for social justice and for environmental restoration, not just in our tribe, but in our larger communities. So that, for instance, in our casino where we have nearly 2,000 employees, everybody who works 20 hours or more a week gets the Kaiser Gold Cadillac plan where they pay nothing out of their paycheck for full coverage. You do the right thing. The compact with the governor, instead of him giving us, again, we have to do revenue share, which is interesting in lieu of taxes because we're a sovereign nation. So what do? Instead of make a deal with him, instead of giving the bulk of that to the state, bring it back to the community and tell them how they're going to spend it. For us, up to $25 million a year that can only be spent on environmental restoration, where workers get paid the same thing. So you take your opportunity and you do the right thing. That's where it fits in Indian country, and that's where we, if we can't do it anywhere else, are buying back the land so that we can take care of it with the same ethic and aesthetic of our ancestors.
Whoa!